I'm really excited to show you something. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to add a little bit of a path here. Yeah, we'll come over there and just add a path. Let's make it go a little bit further, and then we'll come into, maybe we can add some trees over here, some trees here, and then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to save it. Let's head over there. Oh, that guy's going to try to attack us. And check this out. So now it's actually in the game. Our editor is working, and we can actually add entities and, change the world up and, kind of go from there. In this video, we're going to finish the level editor. We're going to make it so that you can place entities down. And then we're also going to introduce a whole new file format for saving our maps. Just a forewarning, this is probably one of the more difficult videos that we've done. And so if you get lost anywhere, the completed source code is in the description below, and feel free, you can leave a comment below and stuff if you get stuck. So let's get started. This video includes 2 new images, this trash can one right here, and then also this little tree one right here, which you can download from my website. The link is in the description below. The source code for the previous video is also included in the description below if you want to follow along. When you drag those images in there, just drag them to the images folder, content, and then images. There are timestamps for each one of the sections if you just want to skip to a certain section. If you are following along from the previous video, there's a slight modification that we're going to make. Let's come in here to Source, Components, and Editor. And you can actually take this entire folder that has the placetiles.py file and just go ahead and delete it. You may not have that folder, and if that's okay, if that's the case, then that's all right. And then we'll come into the editor helper, and then this line up here at the top, we're going to go ahead and just get rid of that. And then one last thing that we're going to do is we'll come in here and we'll get rid of 32 and 33. In its place, we're going to add a new class called entity placeholder. And this is going to store the data about an entity, like a tree or the player or something, and let them fill out the different attributes. We're going to go into Source, Components, and then we're going to create a new file here called editor.py. This file is going to store the data about an entity, and it's also going to ensure that you don't have more than one entity in the same location. So in order to do that, we're going to use a set of all of the different positions that other entities have taken. We have a new class entity placeholder. We're going to take in the ID. That correlates with, you don't have to come here real quick, I just want to show you, our entity factories here. 0 is the player, 1 is the pine tree, 2 is the small rock, etc. So what we can do is we can, in our editor.py file, we can store the ID, which is whatever it is, a player or a tree or whichever, and then any additional arguments that we're going to come with that. So when we actually set up this entity, what it's going to do is it's going to get a taken position, and we're going to do this. So, so let's say that we have an entity that has an X of 5 and then a Y of 7. So what'll happen is the 5 will get put over here in the number, and then the 7 will be put over there. And the benefit of this is it creates a nice just number that the computer can very easily store in the set, as opposed to having to do like a list or tuple or something inside of there. We're going to do the opposite. So when we actually break down this entity, so we'll basically calculate that position again that I showed you, and then we'll come in and just remove ourselves from the taken positions so that some other entity can put itself there. As I was going along the video, one other issue that I ran into is with the combat component. So we're going to go to Source, Components, and then combat.py. In the breakdown method of combat.py, this right here was causing some issues. We'll go ahead and get rid of this. And we're also going to get rid of this in the unequip as well. And that will fix those issues. Perfect. So now we need to change the entity factories to be able to support our editor. So let's go into source, data, and then objects.py. So here's the issue with this, is that in order for the editor to display more information, like the name of the entity and some of these arguments down here as you're filling them out, we need a little bit more information. We need to know the name of what it is, like if it's the player or pine tree or whichever. We need to know, we need to have an icon that we can use for each thing. And then we also need to know what these arguments are. And then any sort of default values that we're going to set for it, like when you place a new entity down. So up at the top, what we're going to do is we're going to create a class called entity factory. This entity factory is going to take in a name, the icon, a factory, which is the original function that we were using that creates an entity for us, any names of arguments that you're passing to it, and then the defaults for those. And by default, there is no arguments and there is no defaults. By default, it's just going to be empty lists. So go ahead and set these on the entity factory, and then I'll show you how to use these here in a second. So let's take each one of these one at a time and we'll do these together. So the player, for example, instead of just being a lambda, instead of just being some anonymous function that we can call to get a player back, what we're going to do instead is we're going to use this entity factory. So we'll come in here, we'll say entity factory, and then it needs to be supplied with a name. So we'll say player. And this way now we can display, oh, you have a player here. The next thing is going to be player.png, which is the icon that's going to display with that. Then for the factory, we're going to take this whole thing, just don't get the comma at the end. We're going to cut it and we're going to move that right there. So that the third argument is the actual function that creates a player for you. And actually, that's it. There's nothing more that we need to do. Let's just get rid of this comment on 23 and we'll go from there. We can still leave this here just, as we're kind of scanning, but yeah. And then at the end of 25, at the end of this whole entity factory, we're going to come in here, we're going to add a comma. So the benefit of doing this is that we now have an object that stores the name, an icon, and then a factory. And it just keeps things nice and organized. And later on, we're going to be able to use this to display the name and just, load icons and stuff. So let's come in here, we'll do the pine tree together. So the pine tree is kind of the same thing. We're going to come in here. I'm going to come to the same level, entity factory, and then we'll say pine tree. We'll come in here, we'll say tree.png. That'll be the icon that it shows up. And then we're going to take this whole thing and we're just going to cut it and then move it in there. It actually doesn't hurt if you put the comma there. That's fine if you do. And then one last thing though, this comma we need to get rid of and just move it over to here and we're done. So for small rock, I'm going to come over here, do the same thing. I created a name and then an icon. And then we're going to come in here and do the lambda over here. Get rid of this comma. Just make sure you check the commas as you're doing these. Okay, perfect. So this one's actually, the teleporters are where we're actually going to add arguments. So let's come in here, we'll say entity factory, just like we did. If I can spell, perfect. This is teleporter up. The icon is teleporter up. .png, and then we're going to take this lambda here, we'll cut it, move it over there, and then comma space, we're going to add some more stuff here. So we need to add the arguments that it takes in. So first is the area file that is going to be loaded when the player runs into this teleporter or runs into this little arrow. It takes them to a different area, and so we need to load that area. We're also going to ask for a player X position in that new area. And then we're also going to ask for a player Y position in that new area as well. If we come in here, now VS Code may be thinking, I don't know what this is. Let's get rid of the comma. And then at the very end here, we're going to add another comma. One more thing. Let's go right after these square brackets here. And we're going to add defaults for each thing. So we'll come in here, we'll default to say forest map. We're going to default to 1 and then we'll default to 1. So the player, and these are strings because they're being saved into the file. When the file is loaded, then it will actually convert those to numbers, but that's why we put those around in quotes. So the benefit of this is when you create a new teleporter, then by default, it's just going to default to the forest map, and it will go to the player will be placed in the top left corner of that map. But obviously, when you're editing these, you'll change these as you go. So perfect. We can come in here. We could do the same thing for this. Now, there's some copy paste we can do. Let's do that. So I'm going to copy this. If you do that, then just we need to put teleporter right over here and also over here. Let me do that. And then let's come in here. We'll say teleporter right, and we're done with that one. Let's get rid of this. And then we're going to come in here and we'll do the same thing over there. I'll show you how I'm doing this so you can kind of see. So yeah, teleporter down, do that over here, do that over here, teleporter down, and then let's get rid of the original lambda here. One last one that we're going to do, we're going to do teleporter left. So we'll come in here, we'll do that. And it may seem kind of somewhat repetitive that we have 4 different ones, but we really do, because we want to be able to just click one of those 4, whether it's facing up, down, left, or right, and then just click where we want. So this will make it easier as you're doing the editor later. Okay, so doing the dropped item is going to always show up as a diamond just for this video. If you're interested in making it show the actual item that is on the screen in the editor, then we can obviously do that. When you load the game, it will show that item, but just the way that the entity editor is going to show for at least the first version, it'll just show a diamond icon. So let's do that. Let's come in here. We'll say entity factory. And we'll say dropped item, and let's say diamond.png. Just make sure that it's that one. Yeah, diamond.png, perfect. Okay. And then comma, and then hit enter. Take this entire thing, you can just cut it and move it over there. For this one, the arguments that we're going to have are the item type ID, and then the quantity of item that is dropped. And by default, it's going to be 1 and 1. So going into here, just kind of show you that real quick. Let's add a comma at the very end. And then you don't have to follow me here. I just want to show you what I mean by item ID and quantity. So in here under item types, we have a bunch of different items. This is 0. This is 1, the axe. Then pickaxe is 2, and sword is 3, and so on and so forth. So yeah, whatever number that you put here correlates with what it is on this list here. Okay, so let's do the next one together as well. So entity factory. We're almost done. We have 2 more to go. Let's say NPC, and then the icon is going to be let's see, NPC female 1.png. And then take this entire lambda here, do that. We have 3 arguments. First argument here is we have NPC's name. The second argument is that we have the image. And then the third is the NPC file, or the dialogue file that the NPC is going to load. By default, we're going to name the NPC Amy. Let's see, the image is going to be npc female1.png, and then the npc file is going to be amy.npc. So perfect. And then obviously you can change these later. So one last one, and that's the enemy. Now the enemy is kind of interesting because it might, we only have 1 argument here, so we only have the image so far. So let's do that. Let's come in here and we'll do entity factory. I don't know, let's do rogue, for example, right? And then it's going to be npc male1.png. And then we'll take this entire lambda and do that. Cool. We have an argument, so we're going to come in here and we're going to say, what is here? The image. So we'll come in here and we'll take in an image for that. and we'll default to npc male1.png. So not all rogues need to have the first male sort of sprite that we have. You can use other ones if you want, but it will default to that. I forgot a comma here on 81. Let's come in here, we'll do that, and then we're done. Perfect. And in Python, you can also add commas here. I know that sounds a little strange, but it will help you later on as you're adding it, where you can just say, hey, I want another enemy, you know, and come in here and do that, and then add your enemy that you want. So come over here to 92, and what we're going to do is we're going to say .factory at the end of this line. And that will basically just set everything up, you know, normally. It's going to call whatever the factory is inside of the entity factory. So you might notice that like the first one's name, icon factory, it's going to call that factory there. So now that we've done a lot of this, we have the data in place for all of the entities, which is now going to help a lot. So now let's dive into our editor. So let's come in here to, I'm going to close content here. I'm going to close, yeah. So let's go to source, stages, editor, and then we're going to do edit map.py. First, we're going to, similar to the last video where we were picking tiles, we're also going to pick entities as well. So the current index of the entity that the user has selected. Also, we have a click tool where you can click on an entity and edit its properties. So we're going to, by default, there's no entity that's been selected, but yeah, we'll keep track of that as well. Our click tool is also going to be able to change the fields of the entity or the arguments. So you don't have to go here, but just to peek back at this objects that we just wrote, you'll be able to edit these properties. So like if you place an NPC down, you'll be able to change the name of the NPC and whichever. So we're going to store all of reference to each one of those fields here. So similar to how we have a set current tile function, we're also going to have a set entity function, which we'll do here. So yeah, this can be fed into a scroll view, which we'll do here in a second. Our set tool function is called when we click on one of the buttons to the left for the different tools. We're going to add another one. We're going to say tool == save, and actually do a capital S. Perfect. We'll do a tool called save. And then we're going to call our function save map. We did that in the last video, but there's nothing there yet. Another new tool that we're going to have is our entity picker. It's very similar to the tile one as well. So we'll come in and do that. We're going to load our entity factories, and then we also need to load the camera. And you'll see why in a second, just because with we need to compensate. We're going to load our camera, and that's because when you move the camera, we need to know what the mouse position is relative to the camera. So if the camera is over to the right a little bit, we do the mouse position plus whatever the camera is. So what we can do is we can get each one of the names of each one of the images by doing this. This is called list comprehension. We're running through each one of the entity factories, and then we're getting the icon out of it, and we're getting all of those in a list. So, and you don't have to go here, just going back to our entity factories that we did earlier, we're going to take like diamond.png, you know, NPC female 1, NPC male 1, etc. And we're going to grab each one of these names and throw it into a list. That way we can populate our scroll view. So the next thing is we're going to have our scroll view. It's going to have all of the names of images to load. And then it's also, we're going to call a function create scroll sprite generic, which just makes a image for each one that you can pick in the scroll view. We're also going to call our set entity function. So when somebody clicks on the scroll view, it's going to say, hey, they chose 3, which is I think it's a teleporter, or they chose 0, which is the player, for example. The scroll view is going to be 64 pixels big by that much. Each one of the items are going to be 64 pixels plus 4. And then the width is going to be 64. And then the height is going to be the camera height. Is going to be the camera height, which is basically from top to bottom of the screen. And then we're going to move everything over to the right part of the screen. So we're going all the way to the right, camera width, and then we're just subtracting it to move just a little bit back to the left. And then we'll come in here, we'll add it to our tool entities. That way, if we choose a different tool, then it will just clean it up and get rid of it. So this is good so far. Why don't we go down to the way bottom of everything? And down at the bottom, we actually have each one of the buttons for each one of the different kinds of tools that we've got. We're going to add another one here. So honestly, what you could do is just actually copy one of these buttons here. I'll come in here and I'll do that. And we'll paste. And then the button, let's say entity is going to be the tool. This is fine. That's fine. And then we're going to have entity.png. This is one of the new images that we have. And then let's see here. So 64 times 1, 64 times 2. Let's do 3 here for the Y. That'll push it down a little bit. And then come over here to the back button and also change that to 4 as well. So this is 3 for the entity button, and that's 4. We've done enough where we can and should test it. So let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. Okay, so coming in here, let's go to editor and we'll go to forest. And then we have that new button over there on the left, and let's click it. And there we go. And so on the right, let me move my head here real quick. So on the right, we've got a new scroll view. But one issue is that when we scroll, it sort of does that. So we need to fix that. The other thing too, let me come back into it so we can see. The other issue too is that like the tree, for example, is really big. And then some of these other entities are kind of big as well. So we need to kind of size some of those down. So let's do that real quick. So this is a great opportunity to change our scroll view to do that. So let's go ahead and we're going to dive into components, UI, and we'll say scroll view.py. So find the one that says create scroll sprite generic. And what we're going to do is we're going to say E equals entity, and we'll say sprite, item, and true. Similar to what we did here. And then instead, we're going to return E. We're going to put stuff in the middle of these. So let's come in here and we're going to say S equals E dot get sprite. Perfect. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to say S dot scale. And we'll say 32 and 32. And we'll go from there. So what this will do is this will size everything down to 32 by 32 pixels. Let's come over here. We'll dive into main.py and we'll run it. Okay, let's jump into the editor. Let's go to forest. We'll open that up. Yeah, so perfect. So you can kind of see that there's these things over there on the right. Now we still have this issue. So let's fix that. So we're going to dive into scroll view. So again, that's source, components, UI, and scroll view.py. And so what we're going to do is we'll come down to the draw function. For some reason I had this commented out, but we're going to add this code here. We're just going to uncomment that out. So what it's going to do is it's going to fill the background of the scroll view with just a blank color, essentially. And then it'll draw everything on there. So let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. Okay. And then what we're looking for is if we come in here and scroll, and yeah, now it works. Now, another thing that you should test is you should test and see, so let me move my head again. You should test the tiles. So click the tiles and just try to scroll there. Yep, we're good to go. Okay, so we did that. I'd like to show you a bug. So go ahead and click the tile thing. And then we've got that up. And then let's say that we click the entities. Have a look here. It's not adding those correctly from the previous video. So let me show you a fix. So let's come in here to stages, editor, and then edit map.py. Go ahead and jump into line 83 and 84 on the screen. This is part of the if tool tile inside of the set tool function. So we were originally here, we were doing this with the entities to add that for the scroll view. So we're going to come down to where it says if tool tile, and we're going to go down to these two right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say field label.entity. Perfect. So we got field label.entity, and then we're going to do field1.entity as well. Let's go ahead and test it. So we're going to come into main.py and we'll run it. So in here, go ahead and open up the tiles, and then go ahead and open up the entities. Now here's another bug here. You might notice that this thing down here is not disappearing. So let's fix that. The issue is on text fields. They're not removing themselves when they get deleted. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into source, components, UI, and text input.py. we're going to find the breakdown function here. Come in here and add the following. We're going to remove the text input from the UI drawables if you call the breakdown function. Let's test it. Let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. So go ahead and open up the tiles. So we got brush size, which is good. And then go ahead and open up the entities. Perfect. And everything disappears. So now we've done this, let's code placing the entities. Let's go into stages, editor, and edit map.py. Close this. We're going to dive into the place entity function, and we're going to code this. We're going to end up bringing in the camera, the area that we're going to add to, and then the each one of the entity factories. We're going to get the X and Y position of where the mouse is relative to the camera. So if the camera moved a little bit, we're just going to add to the mouse's position to compensate. Then we're going to get the tile that the entity is going to be placed on. So we're going to say, okay, the entity is going to be placed at, this tile or, that tile or whichever. So you're getting the mouse position, which is in pixels, but now we're getting the tile, which the mouse is pointing at. Let's bring in our new class that we did, our entity placeholder. So we're going to come in here, we're going to create a whole new entity. This entity is going to have a sprite, which is just going to be the icon. That way it just shows that on the screen. And then it's going to have our entity placeholder thing here. So whichever entity that it is, the current entity index that's selected in the scroll view. And then it's going to have the default arguments for that specific thing. And then it's going to place it at that tile. Now, earlier in this video, the way that entity placeholder works is that when it gets added to an entity, it checks to see if it's colliding with any other entity. And if it is, then it removes itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to check and see if it still has an entity placeholder. And if it does, we're going to add that entity to the area. If not, we're just going to ignore that entity and then it'll just get freed up and won't be saved. Basically, we're checking to see if there's already an entity there. So the entity placeholder is going to check, hey, was there an entity already placed at that tile? And if so, it's going to remove itself. It's just going to delete itself. And then what we can do is we can check whether it exists or not. And if it doesn't exist, then we're not going to add it. Okay, so now that we've coded this place entity function, we need to call it when we're clicking. So if you scroll down, we've got this function on click that just basically is called whenever we click the button. So what we're going to do is you might notice there's one for the click tool and then there's also one for tile. We need to add another one. So we'll come in here, elif tool equals entity. Right, so if the mouse clicked somewhere on the screen and we currently have the entity tool active, we're going to come in here, we're going to do place entity, same thing, mouse pose 0 and mouse pose Y. I'm sorry, 1 for that. So we'll come in and we'll do that. We have enough to test it. Let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. We'll go to editor, forest map. Let's come in here and let's create a couple rocks. And there we go. We're able to place rocks. Let's do a couple of these. Let's do a couple of these. Yeah, so now you're able to place entities on the screen. The problem is we're not able to delete them. So we also need a delete tool. So let's do that. Let me clean this up here a little bit. So we're going to come into source, stages, editor, and then we're going to go to edit map.py. So go to the very bottom of this file where we have all the buttons that we've defined. And we're going to come in here and take one of these here. I'll make it a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So go ahead and take the entity button, for example, and we're going to copy it. So we'll come in here and we'll paste another button. We're going to set tool to delete. And then the only other thing we need to change is this sprite right here. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say, we're going to say trash.png, which was included with the assets that we started with. Perfect. We just need to adjust the positions of these. So this, we're going to come in here, we're going to say 64 times 4 instead. And then this one, we're going to do 64 times 5. And that will move it down. Perfect. Okay. So now that we've got this, let's code deleting entities. Let's find a spot for it. Let's come in here maybe right after the click tool. We'll come in here and we'll do def delete tool. And this will take in a mouse X and a mouse Y. So basically, anytime that you add a new tool to it, you can just do a function of some sort. And then, yeah, take in the mouse X and mouse Y position. We're going to come in here and take in the camera and the area. Let's find the position of the mouse relative to the camera as we did earlier. Let's check each one of the entities in the area. We're going to delete these based on the sprite. Now, even if an entity doesn't have a sprite, in the editor it will. Because when we add entities to the editor, it's going to have a sprite and then that entity placeholder thing. So anyway, we're going to check for its sprite. We're going to come in here, we're going to get a reference to that sprite. Now, so this logic right here is similar to the logic we did with collision detection. We're checking left, right, up, and down to see whether the mouse is currently inside the entity. And if that's the case, we're going to come in here, we're going to just say e.delete self. For further optimization, what you can do is you can type return here. What this does is this basically means once you've deleted one of the entities, you can stop looking at. We already deleted something. Perfect. Let's come in here. We're going to add this to our on click. So down here, similar to the other ones that we did, we're going to come in here. We're going to create another tool for our delete tool. So instead of entity, we'll do delete. And then instead of this, we're going to say delete tool. And then, yeah, so now if the user has selected the delete tool, then it will run the delete tool and it'll delete entities. And we have enough here to test it. Let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. Let's go to editor, forest, and then you might notice there's this new icon, the trash can. Click it and start deleting things. There we go. Yeah, perfect. It even deleted the player. It deleted, yep, perfect, perfect. So now we were able to delete everything. Another test that you can do is just make sure that you move the camera a little bit and then still try it. So just make sure that, if that's the case, then that's able to delete everything. I think that might be the sprite of the thing. We'll have to investigate that. Okay, so we have the delete tool. We now need to be able to edit entities. Here, let me show you. So I'm going to dive into this. So let's say that we've got, these NPCs here, for example. Well, we need to be able to give them names. And we need to be able to choose a NPC file that will be used, when doing that. And like these teleporters here, we need to be able to choose the map that's going to go to and the location of the player when they get to that map. Because of this, we have this click tool up here at the top, where we very top left, where we can select an entity, and then what we'll do is we'll make it so that you can actually edit those properties. So let's close this. We're going to dive into source, stages, editor, and edit map.py. And let's come in here and let's move up all the way to click tool. And click tool should be a stub here. It should just be a function that doesn't have anything yet. We're going to come in here and similar to the other ones, we're going to find the location relative to the camera. The logic is quite similar to the delete logic, where we're basically looping through each entity. If it has a sprite, we're getting that sprite. We could probably refactor this. We're going to look and see if that entity is currently being clicked on. I think there is opportunity to maybe refactor this. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in that. We can. So if we get to this part, that means that we've clicked on an entity and we actually successfully did that. So the goal is that we need to show the properties of that entity. And we need to be able to allow the user to be able to edit those. We're going to come in here and get the entity placeholder class, also the entity factories, and we're also going to reference the current selected entity and fields, because we're going to change those here in a second. So we're going to clear out the fields, And then we're also going to set the selected entity to the entity that we just clicked on. Let's get a reference to the entity placeholder that we have. We're going to get a reference to the ID that it is, and then also the particular factory that we're going to use. Now this is where the code that we did earlier with the names is going to be very useful. Next, we need to display what kind of entity it is on the screen. I'm going to hide this so it's a little bit easier. We need to display what kind of entity it is. So if you click on a player, it should say player. Or if you click on a tree, it should say tree. So we'll get a label for that, and then we're going to add it to our tool entities. That way it'll clean it up if we select another tool. Okay, so this is where we're going to go through each argument that entity has. So NPCs, for example, they've got a name, the image that you're going to have, and then an NPC file. So those are 3 arguments. We're going to keep track of the X position of each one, and then as we sort of place one of those on the screen, we're going to move that X position up a little bit. Let's say, for example, that we have an NPC. So it's going to display NPC here, and then it's going to have a text field, and then it's going to say name, right? So we have the X position here, so it's going to know that. And then we need to get the X position here. That way we can come in and add our next label over here, and this will be for the sprite that's being used. And then NPCs have one last argument. So again, the X position now is this, and we're going to display another text field, and this is for the NPC file. So basically, it's going to look something like this, where the user can edit each one of these text fields here. Like they can type in a name, they can type in a sprite, and they can type in an NPC file. And it's also showing the kind of entity that it is over here. So because of that, we're going to loop through each one of the arguments, and we're also going to keep track of the X position. First, we're going to create the label that displays the type of what that argument is. So for example, you saw, name is going to be up at the top. Then we're going to create the text field right below it. And then this is for the actual text field itself. So we're going to create a text input. We're going to get the arguments and go from there. And it's going to use X for each one of these. And this is where we're going to use our fields. We're going to add the text field to our fields. That way we can reference them later. Each one of these text fields is going to be 200 pixels big. And we're going to basically move it by 220. That means there'll be a 20 pixel sort of gap in between them. And then we're going to come in here, we're going to add both the label and field to our tool entities. That way it cleans it up after. Now what you could then do is you type return. That way if you click on an entity, it doesn't do that again. One more issue I forgot to mention, but it's possible that if we click on another entity, it's going to create a whole nother set of fields. So because of that, we actually need to clean up the tool entities every single time that we sort of click on something else. Dive into the click tool here. At the very top, we're going to clean up all the tools. That way, if we click, the tool again or something, it'll just clear it out, right? So now that we've done all this, one issue with this is that we have a text field, but if the user types anything in it, then it's not going to change. So we're going to test this. Let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. So let's come into the editor. Let's go to the forest center. And this is going to be a little interesting. We can't click on any of these entities yet, and I'll just explain why in a second. But let's create another one. Let's come in here and we're going to create, let's create another NPC over here. And then we're going to switch to the click tool and we're going to click on this NPC. And you might notice that all the text fields now show up down here at the bottom. So we've got Amy and then the image, right? And then the NPC file that's loading. And the user can edit this. So they can come in here and they can say bob.npc instead, right? Or whichever. There's 2 issues with this I want to show you. So one of them is that existing entities here don't actually have those entity placeholders. The other issue is that these text fields don't actually change anything when you do that. So we need to make it so that all these entities here basically do the same thing, like they have the entity placeholders. And then the second thing that we need to do is we need to make it so that this actually does something, so that it actually saves it. Watch this, I'm going to show you. If I click this NPC here, it crashes everything because we haven't added it. And you might notice it says none type has no attribute ID. That's because the placeholder is null. It doesn't have a placeholder. The thing that we need to do is when we actually are in editor mode, all of the entities need to basically have those placeholders when we load them in. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into source core, and then we're going to go to area.py. This is where we're actually loading all of our entities into the game. So we're going to come into line. Let's come over here to line 61 through 68. Now, in the previous video, we removed every single thing but sprites. That was great for the last video, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to make those entities have, we're just going to create entities that have sprites and those entity placeholders. We're just going to simplify this. So let's come in here, line 63 through 67 for me. That whole for loop here, where we're looping through the components and removing it and stuff, we're going to get rid of all of that. Okay, so we're going to import sprites, entity placeholders, entity factories, and then also entities themselves because we're going to create an entity. Perfect. And then we're going to create an entity. It has a sprite just to display itself, and then it also has a entity placeholder. And this is any of the arguments that are placed after the first two, because if you recall, the first thing is the ID, and then the second and third thing is X and Y in your files. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to just add that to the entities that we've got. Now what we're going to do is go to line 60 where, for me, where we've got this create entity call. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut it or delete it. And we're going to come in here, and if it's not in editor mode, then we're going to create the entity. And then we're just going to add this thing up here. So yeah, so if it's not editor mode, we'll just create the entity normally. Otherwise, we're going to create the entity with only a sprite as the icon that it should show, and then an entity placeholder. Perfect. So this means, let's go ahead and actually test this out. So let's dive into main.py, and we're going to run it. And what we should be able to do is we should be able to click on any single entity and be able to show properties about it, which now we can. So you can literally click at any, like there's this enemy here, this rogue, I guess. And then, yeah, you should be able to do that. Click on the player, click on dropped item. Now you can come in here and you can actually edit any one of these things in this game. Like you can click on pine trees. There's no properties for pine trees, but it's still, you know, it'll show you that you clicked on a pine tree. If you click somewhere that's not here, like try to click away from the entity and it should do that. Another test too is move the camera a little bit and try to click as well. And just make sure that it also still works. Perfect. So the last thing we need to do is make it so that we can actually, these things actually do something, like they save it. And then we'll get into actually saving all this data, and then we're done. Like we basically have a working editor after all this. So give yourself a pat on the back if you've made it this far. So if you get stuck with anywhere with this, just feel free, you know, again, as a reminder, all the source code is in the description below. And I hope it can help you out. My suggestion is that we add like an event listener to text fields, that whenever you type something, that you can optionally call a function. I was testing out a different couple ways that we could do it, and the easiest one was just letting the user type and then it just immediately changing that, and it just makes a lot of sense. So let's dive into source, components, UI, and then we're going to go to textinput.py. Come up to the very top. There's a bunch of different parameters and a lot of optional parameters. We're going to add another optional parameter here. So we're going to come over here, and let me actually make this a little bit easier to kind of, yeah, there we go. We're going to add another field here. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say on change, and it's always none. So by default, we don't have any listener here, but we can. Let's come over here right after the super call. We'll just come in here and say self.onChange equals onChange. Then come into the, let's see, the text input function. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if self.onChange is not none, then we're going to call self.onChange and parentheses after it. That's it. We're just going to call whatever function that is that they give us. And we'll just say, okay, the text changed. What would you like to do? With that in place, we're going to code a function that saves all the arguments. So let's come in here to source, and we're going to go to stages, editor, and we're going to go to edit.py. Let's come up a little bit, and we're going to find the delete tool. So, okay, perfect. The delete tool, let's come in here and we'll code something right before the delete tool. So we're going to create a function called save args. What this will do is this will take in the current entity that is selected and it'll just save its arguments and just set them. Let's get our reference to entity placeholders. We're going to go through each field that is currently on the selected entity. To get the value of it, you just get the text out of the fields. And then we come in here and we take the selected entity, we get its entity placeholder, and then we set that argument to whatever is in the text field. Let's come down to the, we're going to go up a little bit. We're going to find the click tool. So the click tool is a very big function, but it's actually right before the save arg. So let's find the fields. It'll say text input where we're creating this text input. Find where you're doing the text input inside of here. And we're going to come in here, we're going to say comma and hit enter. We're going to say on change. And if you did it right, like if you found the right spot, notice that VS Code is like telling you about it. So if you're writing it and you don't see this pop up, like just make sure that you're in the right spot. And we'll say on change, and we're going to say equals, we'll do lambda save args, and then parentheses after it. So it's going to call that function to save all the arguments anytime that any text input is going to change in the click tool. Perfect. So to test this, let's go ahead and we're going to jump into main.py and we're going to run it. And what we should be able to do is we should be able to edit the property of some entity and it should stick. So I'm going to come in here. Okay, there's like Albert here. I'm going to change this person to Bob. And you should be able to click away. And then you should be able to click on Bob again. And Bob is now still there. So it now works. Perfect. All right. With that in place, we can place entities. We can change their properties, right? And we can also delete them. The last part of this video is going to be saving all of this to a file. Now, with this being said, I actually switched the format for files and how we're going to store them. I switched to a binary format. There's a couple reasons for this. One is that with tiles, we actually only had a maximum of 10 different tile types that you could do. By switching to a binary format, we can have a maximum of, and in this video, we're going to do a maximum of 65,000 different tile types that you can do, which I think will give you a very broad brush of, things that you can do for your level editor. The second reason why is because we've sort of changed the format of a lot of this stuff. I think this is a good opportunity to talk about binary files and kind of go into that. The other thing too I'll mention is that when you change a file format, you have to think of the previous ones, especially if you've written something that's in production. Like let's say that you publish a game and you have this file format for all your levels or something, and then you want to change that code. Well, the problem is that your players may be on the old format, especially if the old format is like a save file or something like that. What you really need to do is you need your application to be able to handle multiple formats, or at least be able to convert the legacy format over to the new format. And I'm going to show you some tricks that I use to kind of be able to manage that. We're going to actually version our files and kind of just have a discussion about this. Let's come in here and let's wrap this video up by doing that. So we're going to let's close everything, and we'll come in and we'll go to source, core, and area.py. The area file actually had a save file function, which I believe we did in the last video. So go into area.py and we're going to go to the very end, and there should be a save file function that we did in the last video. Obviously, you can see if it's, we have where it's not, if it's not in editor mode, then we're going to raise an error or exception in Python, basically saying that we're not in editor mode, you shouldn't be saving a file. To do binary files, we're going to need to save bytes of data. So let's import the struct module in Python. To get the actual path of the file, we're going to do that. The map folder location, which is content and maps, and then plus whatever the file name is with a slash in between it. To write a file as binary, we use W and then we use a B inside of there. So that says we want to write a file, and we want to overwrite it if it exists, and we want to write it as binary. Now here's the problem, is that we don't know the difference between whether it's a new file or whether it's an old file. So we need some kind of way of distinguishing that. The very first part of the file is going to be what we call the header of the file. A file header is a bunch of just information about the rest of the file. You could think of it like a book, where a book has like a table of contents in the front of it, right? The table of contents gives you information about basically the contents of the rest of the book. So we're gonna have the same thing for files. We're gonna create a little thing for the header of the file here. And in order to distinguish between the new file format and the old one, we're gonna zero out the first byte. So the first 8 bits is just gonna be zeros, and that'll be sort of an indicator that we're using the new file format. To write a bunch of zeros, do the following. So basically what we're doing is this struct pack thing allows you to basically say how many bytes that you're doing. And there's a bunch of these different characters. I'm gonna put a reference to it in the description below. But they reference, if you're ever familiar with C or C++, they're actually the similar types. So C is a char type, and that's 1 byte. So 8 ones and zeros, right? 8 bits, 1 byte. We're going to write a 0 byte there. You might have used a \n before for as like a new line. A \o is a null byte. It's just a bunch of zeros that we're going to write there. So yeah, we're going to get a bunch of bytes, and we're going to basically say we want to write a 0 byte there. So next, we want file versions. So in case we ever need to change the format again in the future, just putting the number of the version in the very beginning is very useful. So what we'll do is we'll come up here and we're going to just write a, we'll declare this variable here in a second. The I is for integer, which is 4 bytes of a signed number, meaning a number that has either a minus sign or not. Basically, this means that we can have a number for each file version. So if you ever want to change how this file is formatted, you can just go up 1 number and then save those, and that'll say, oh, this is version 2 or version 3, and it makes it very easy to do that. Let's come up here to the way top of the entire file, and we're going to declare a variable called file version. And we're going to set it equal to 2. So anything, and as you change the file version, you can change it to 3 or whichever, and that'll help when you're loading it. So we're going to go down to the way bottom, and we're going to keep going. I don't know what this was doing here. Next, we need the size of the actual tile map itself. And this will make it so that we don't have to put a bunch of new lines for doing that. To save the width and height, we're going to get the first row, and then we're going to get the width, and then we're going to get the height. Now, this also assumes that the width and height is going to be the same for each tile. I'll explain that here in a second. But yeah, and then we're going to write these again. I is just 4 bytes for a number. So you're writing another 4 bytes and another 4 bytes for the width and height. That wraps up the file header. So the file header has a 0 byte to indicate that it's the new file format. Then the next 4 bytes is the version, and then the next 8 bytes is for 4 bytes for the width of the tile map, and then 4 bytes for the height, respectively. So for a total of 13 bytes up at the top of the file, basically giving us information to kind of navigate the rest of the file. So because of that, we're going to, let's put a comment here for saying, okay, now we're in the body of the file. And this is where we need to actually save all the data for the map. So we'll create a function for that here in a second. Let's go ahead and we're just going to, we'll do the following, and then we'll just have it save all the tile data to that. Okay, so now we need to loop through all the entities and save those. So let's come in here and we'll do a for loop for that. And we are in editor mode because we threw an error earlier if we weren't. So because of that, we can assume that each entity has an entity placeholder of some sort, which we're going to get. And then I just want to show you something real quick. So what we're going to try to do, you don't have to click anywhere. So if you look at one of these old formats for the files, let me see if I can find, let's see if we can find something here. Yeah, so each one of these entities, this is how we're saving them, right? Just as a reminder, the first one is the type of the entity. The next two is X and Y, and then any other additional arguments. Basically, we're going to put this string together. So let's dive into area.py. Let's come in here and let's first put together the ID, right, which is the number of what it is, and then the X and the Y. And X and Y are stored like 32, 64, 128. So we're just going to divide it so we know which tile it's at. So in the example of like NPCs, there's additional arguments like the name of the NPC and the NPC file, etc. So we're going to go through and we're going to add any other additional arguments for that kind of entity, and then we'll just go from there. So if you want to store actual text information in a binary format, we'll come in here and we'll basically just convert S, the string, to bytes, and then we'll just get B, which is a bunch of bytes. And then the way this works is that in order to save a string in binary, you basically have to do the number of how big it is, and then S to indicate this is a string of this size. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put the the bytes that we have. So let's say that this is, for example, like 20 regular characters, like on ASCII characters, then you're going to have 20 bytes. That's going to go into the file. We're going to do a file write, just like we did earlier. Now, we need a way to separate each one of the entities. I want to show you something. Okay, so have a look at this for a second. So every single time that you see a red NUL here, like you see like right here, every time you see a red NUL, that's a bunch of 0 bytes. One of the ways that we can separate these entities is by null bytes, just like what we were doing earlier. So we can write out the entity, for example, and then we can have a null byte to say, okay, that's the end of the entity. And then we could do another entity, and then we have the null byte, and we do that. So, and oftentimes in computers, like if you're programming, especially in C, oftentimes strings are stored like this, where you have a bunch of text, and then you have one additional byte that's just zeroed out. Basically, it's almost like punctuation at the end of the sentence, like saying, okay, this is the end of this, right? So because of that, we're going to do kind of the same way. We're going to write the entity data, right? We're going to write whatever the entity is, and then we're going to write a null byte at the end of it, just to separate it from any other entity. So going into our code, again, similar to what we did earlier, we're going to write a null byte as well after that. And then come in here and we're going to do a file.close to end off everything, and we'll go from there. So we've successfully did the saving. Now this is a great opportunity for me to tell you that I want you to absolutely back up all your maps. Okay, so let's close all this for a second and let's just talk about something here real quick. So whenever you're programming IO, like whenever you're programming working with files, and if you've already done files or created files, I want you to save these in case you lose them, in case you have some kind of bug in your code. You don't want to ruin all of the work that you've done. So before we go anything further, what I want you to do is I want you to go into Maps, right-click this, and on my computer it says Open Containing Folder because I'm on Linux. But like if you're on Windows, it's going to say Reveal in File Explorer, or if you're on a Mac, it's going to say Reveal in Finder. And I want you to click that, and I want you to copy those files there and put them somewhere else. That way, if for some reason this goes wrong and everything crashes and burns, you will still have those old files and you can go back to it, right? You always want to do this whenever you're starting to program files, and especially when you're saving files, right? So if you're writing to a file in any way, you generally want to just always ask that question, like, is there data I could potentially lose from this? Am I working with data? A lot of people work with separate files that are just sort of developer files, like they're not really that important. And they test everything and make sure everything works exactly correctly before they move it into production. Let's dive back into area. We need to now extend our load file function. Quite frankly, what we can do is we can just rename this method to load file legacy instead. So this will come in here and it will just, this will come in here. We'll just do load file legacy. We're going to create another whole method called load file, taking in exactly the same thing and the area file. Come in here, we're going to import the struct, create entity and engine. We're going to call engine reset, just like what we did with the legacy file. By the way, we're not going to change any of this code. We're just going to leave it. That's kind of the issue with files is like, because we've already had that file format, you just want to leave it in case you ever run into a legacy file, in the future or something. Okay, so we'll come in here to engine reset. We need to figure out whether the file that we're loading is in the legacy format or if it's not in the legacy format. So because of that, we are going to open the file and we're going to open it as reading binary. Okay, so struct has an unpack function that basically does the opposite of pack. So we're basically saying we want to read a single byte because it's C, which is 1 byte. We're going to do a file read. File read can optionally take in a number of bytes you want to read. So we're only going to read 1 byte. And then you can do square brackets 0 at the very end to say we want the first. It's going to give you like a list. But if you do square bracket 0, it'll get the first thing out of that. So then we're going to convert that to a string. That way we can read it. We're going to check and see if the first byte's a null byte. If it's not, we're going to load it legacy. So come in here and immediately just close the file that we loaded. We'll open another one in this load legacy of the same file, but just, we'll close this one for now. We can even come in here and print to the console that we're loading a legacy file and then just call self.loadFileLegacy, and that'll load the old format. This may sound a bit repetitive, and you might be tempted to think, well, what about object-oriented programming? What about, making this, I don't want to repeat myself. Like, we really shouldn't be copy-pasting the code. The thing is when it comes down to files, you really do not want this code to change because it's the legacy file format, right? Unfortunately, like, there are files in existence that have this format, and so that's why we actually can't really change it. I would somewhat encourage you to somewhat repeat yourself in this case, and to really avoid, changing any of the code in here, to do that. Similar to the other one, we're going to get a list of entities, and then we're also going to get the name as well, and then we're going to get the name of the file as well. So this first part is we're going to load the header. So we've already read from the first byte. So now we're going to read the next 4 bytes and see the version number. Now, from this point, you can actually check the version number from here, but that's for in the future. If we ever change this file format, we'll come in here, we'll do an if statement with that. Let's come in here and let's read the next 8 bytes for the width and height, and then we'll convert those to integers. So now we know how big the tile map is. Let's come in here and we'll load the tile data, and then we'll pass it onto the map with that tile data. We'll loop through each row, and we'll create a row like that. And then we're going to come in here. We're going to loop through, so then for each row. So next, we're actually going to read 2 bytes per tile now. The way that we do a short is with a H like this. So what this allows us to do is to actually get up to like 65,000 different types because we're doing that. So we're going to, if you assign 2 bytes to something, you can have up to 65,000 different tiles. So we're going to get the tile number. The H means that we're going to read 2 bytes, and we're doing similar. We're just doing square bracket 0 to get the first thing. We're going to add that number to our row, and then we're going to add the tiles to that. Lastly, we're going to come in here. We're going to initialize our map with tiles, and then also the tile types as well. Now this false parameter we'll get to here in a second when we code the map, but yeah, we'll go from there. So to load each entity, we're just going to read the rest of the entire file. So to kind of visualize this for a second, so all of this is just all the tile data. And then all of this is all of the entity data. So you might notice it just runs to the end. So we're just going to load all the stuff at the end. So yeah, we'll just come in here. If you do file.read, you don't put anything, it's just going to read all the way to the end. Let's convert all of that to a string. So instead of having a bunch of bytes, now we've got a string. And these are all delimited by null terminating characters. Again, just I want to show you that. See all these little red nulls in the middle of each one of them? So that's what like separates each one. So what we're going to do is we're just going to split on all those null characters. We're going to throw away the very last one. Let me show you why. So if you go to the very end of the file, there's a null terminating character at the end here. If you call the split function on this by the null characters, it's going to give you just like an empty string back on the thing. So we're just going to throw away the last one because of that. We're going to loop through each one of the entities. We'll come in here, we'll do a try catch. Let's come in here and we'll add the following. Actually, I like to kind of, just for the sake of this, let's do the except right now. So I said a try catch. I thought we're writing in Python. Yeah, so we'll do the except right away. And then we'll just print an error in case we are not able to load that entity. And then we're also going to print basically the message and the traceback of that, just in case something goes wrong. Okay, so if we are in editor mode, by the way, this is actually a copy of what we did in load file legacy. But you might be thinking, well, then why don't we make this part a function that like both of them can call or whatever? I think that load file legacy should stay the same regardless. And the reason why is because if we were to do a function for both of these and then we'll call it, if that function changes in the future, then we may not be able to load legacy files anymore. Like you might actually break the compatibility. Yeah, normally you wouldn't want to repeat yourself, but this is an exception. Yeah. Anyway, let's create the entity similar to what we did there. Just as a reminder, this will delete itself if there's already an entity at that tile. So we're just going to check and see if it still exists, and then we'll add it to our entities. And then we'll come in here, we'll add an else statement here. So if we are not in editor mode, then we're just going to make an entity as normal. That was a lot of code, so really good job. Thank you for sticking with me on this. Let's now move into the map. So let's go to map.py. Map now has a new parameter that we're going to have. So in the map constructor, we're going to say legacy data. So yeah, map now has we're going to take in whether it's legacy data or not. The reason why is, if you recall, legacy data was really just a string that had a bunch of new lines. It's actually just this code right here. So let's highlight all of this. We're going to hit tab, and then what we're going to do is we're going to say if legacy data, and it will load it like it normally would with the legacy data. Otherwise, we're just going to say self.tiles equals tiles. Or equals data. Yeah, perfect. So we're going to come in here and so the data is already loaded from the binary if that's the case. But otherwise, if it is legacy data, then we're just going to do that. Last thing we need to do in this file is we need to have a save to file method. So let's come in here. We could put it maybe right after set tile, and we'll just say save to file. We're going to say self, and we're going to say file. We're going to take it a file. We'll import our struct. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to loop through each one of the rows, and then we're just going to do a bunch of numbers there. Now, I left the enumerates here. So if for some reason you have any errors saving this, I mean, this was quite a bit of code for me too as well to write. So you could like print out X and Y and maybe and kind of go through if you run into any errors. But yeah, we'll just leave that there for now. Either which way, all it does is go from left to right and then goes down by one, left to right, and just prints out or just saves each one of those to that given file. So last thing, if we go into source and we go to stages, editor, and we go to edit map.py, go ahead and find, let's see where it is, find the save map function that we wrote earlier in here. Now we're going to use it. Or we're going to call the area class and basically save the file to whatever file name is passed into it. In testing this, I found one other issue that we need to do. Let's dive into area.py. In the load file legacy, we are going to change one thing. We're going to go to this map here where we're loading the map, and we're going to say true. And that'll just indicate that it is legacy data that we're loading. So we're just going to add true to the end of that. One final adjustment that we're going to make is in the engine class. So in previous testing, I found that the entities were not clearing themselves out when you were switching to a different stage or whichever. So let's dive into the reset function. Let's find that here real quick. Yeah, so down at the very bottom, we're going to find the reset function. Let's go to the very beginning of the reset, and we're just going to add the following. So we're going to loop through each entity in the area, take a copy of it. That way we can loop through the copy, and then we can delete all of the entities. If you don't copy it and you just loop through area.entities, then area.entities will actually change and you'll get unpredictable results. Next, also one other thing too is we're going to dive into area and go up to the way top inside of the constructor for area. We're just going to come in here. We're going to say self.entities equals and then an empty list. That way it'll start out with entities. One other thing, I was hitting a weird bug, and it's because if you look at one of these old file formats, we were splitting it on a minus sign, but it's actually a new line here too as well. So we're going to come over here, we're going to go to core area.py and go into the load file legacy, and then go over here into where it says chunks, and then go ahead and just put a new line here, minus sign, and then new line, and we'll go from there. This was quite a bit of code, and I have to say that it was difficult even for myself. I had to do quite a bit of testing to kind of make this work. So let's see what we've got. Let's dive into main.py and we'll run it. Okay, editor. Let's come into, let's see here. Let's go to volcano map. We'll save it. We're going to exit. We're going to dive into volcano again, and we're good. Look at that. And what we can do is we can actually come in and just add a bunch of rocks here. We can save it. We can exit out of it, and we can dive back into volcano, and they're all still there. And you now have a level editor that you can go in and add entities and set these tiles and stuff. Maybe we'll make a little bit more lava over here. Right, and then we'll save it, we'll exit out, and then we'll go to volcano map again, and there we go. Yeah, that was a lot of work to get that going. We added it so that we added entities, we can edit entities, we can delete them, and then we also added a whole new file format. There's a lot of things that changed in this code, so if you run into any issues or any struggles with this, please feel free to leave a comment below. And then also too, all of the source code is available in the description below for this. So if you get stuck, if you get lost, if you're like, hey, I just cannot figure it out, there's all the source code available too as well for all of this. Yeah, so anyway, thank you so much for following me along with this. This concludes our editor videos. Again, if there's any improvements that you have, maybe we can take another look at the editor here in the future. But I want to kind of move forward with, some other things with this. So thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.